What's up, everybody? Hey, I'm Jeff. This is MidWeek Worship, and we're Two Cities Church. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, y'all. If you're tuning in for the first time, maybe in our community or around the world, I want to explain to you who we are and what we're doing. And instead of taking the time to explain it to you, if you look below me, you'll see some notes for this broadcast. And in those notes, there's a link to a video. Tell you all about why we started doing this thing way back at the beginning of COVID. We're talking about God's covenant of grace. That word covenant, I'm explaining it every week. If you've been watching us, you're getting bored with this by now. That word covenant is a Bible word for contract, but not just any contract. It's actually like a blood contract or a contract for life. God, get this, let this sink in. God, who doesn't need anything from people, there's no reason for him to reach out, decides he wants to be in a relationship with the human beings that he's created, and he chooses to enter into an agreement or a relationship, a contract, so to speak, with them. We call that the covenant of God. In the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the covenant of grace, which means all people, all times. God said, Abraham, I'm going to bless you, and all of the people that ever live after you, those people that bless you, I'm going to bless them. Anybody who curses you, I'm going to curse them. Hey, Noah, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless all people that ever come after you. And here's my proof that I'm going to bless you. I'll put it in the sky for every human being to see in the form of a rainbow. Well, now we're going to get a little bit more specific. Now we're going to talk about God's specific covenant with his people. In the Old Testament, they were the people of Israel. In the New Testament, it's the people of God. In fact, it's actually still Israel. It's just now spiritual Israel instead of a plot of land Israel. And all people that come to faith in Jesus Christ are grafted into the vine of Abraham, the book of Romans says, are considered part of the family of God. This covenant that God makes with Israel begins with Moses. Way back in the Old Testament, in the second book of the Bible, God selects a man by the name of Moses that he's going to use as a deliverer, that word is hard to say, to rescue his people from slavery. God basically taps on Moses' shoulders one day when Moses is way out in the desert walking his father-in-law's sheep. And God taps on his shoulder in the form of a burning bush. And God says, Moses, I want you to be my boy, to go get my people. They're in slavery in Egypt, and I want you to rescue them. I want you to bring them out of Egypt, and I'm going to be with you, and you're going to bring them right here to this very mountain, and they're going to worship me on this mountain. God enters into a covenant with his people, and he explains the terms of that covenant through Moses. In fact, Moses really becomes God's mouthpiece to the people of Israel for most of the end of Moses' life. Moses is an old man. I mean, really old man, like 120 years old man. In the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is walking down memory lane with the children of Israel. He's not doing it because he's old and senile. He's doing it because he knows, I need to remind you all of what happened over the last 40 years. I need to remind you of who God is and what God's done for us. So Deuteronomy is Moses' way of reminding Israel about God. And in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses reminds Israel about the covenant that God has made with them. We're going to look at that covenant in just a second. We're going to memorize that covenant in just a second. But before we do that, I like to get our hearts ready to hear from the Bible. And the way that we get our hearts ready here at Two Cities Church is to sing to Jesus our King. So I'm going to turn things back over to Pete and Alicia. They're going to lead us in some music from all the way down in South Africa. And then after they lead us in some music, we're going to see Moses reminding Israel of the covenant promise that God made with them and they made with him. Take it away, Pete and Alicia.
Who am I that you are mindful of me, that you hear me when I call? Is it true that you love me?
thanks Pete and Alicia for leading us to prepare our hearts to hear from the Bible. We're going to look at Deuteronomy 29, verse 1. I'm going to put it on the screens and I'm going to ask you as a family, would you commit to memorize this verse? In fact, church family, all of Two Cities family, would you join together and would you memorize the Bible? This is hiding God's Word in your heart so that one day when you need it, it's there for you and you don't have to open it up. You don't need to know exactly where in the Bible it is. You just need to memorize this passage, this one verse from the Bible. Hey, I realize this is a little bit longer than most verses that we memorize, but I need you to memorize the whole verse because the whole verse is important. Here it is on the screen. Deuteronomy 29, verse 1. These are the terms of the covenant the Lord God commanded Moses to make with the Israelites while they were in the land of Moab, or back in the desert, in addition to the covenant that He made with them at Mount Sinai. Deuteronomy 29, verse 1. Here's what the Bible is reminding us. When God entered into a contract, just like any other contract, there's some terms to this contract. God says, if you will do these things, people, then I will do these things. If I do these things, then I expect you to do those things. These are the terms of the covenant or the contract. And Moses is reminding us, way back when you were in the desert, God entered into this covenant with you. In fact, He took you to the base of the mountain where He appeared to me in the form of a burning bush, and He recorded that covenant for you. He did it in what's called the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, 5 books. Those 5 books are what we have in the Bible today. This is a record of God's terms of covenant between God and people. I want you to really understand this Bible phrase, covenant. I want you to understand how important, how powerful it is. So I realize we're several weeks into this, but I'm going to show you a video, and this video is going to describe God's covenant with Noah, His covenant with Abraham, His covenant with Moses and the people of Israel, God's covenant with David, and how one man fulfilled all of those covenant promises. This video describes how Jesus is our covenant promise keeper. Check this video out, will you?
If you've been around Christians, you've probably heard of the idea of having a personal relationship with God, which could mean different things in the Bible, like having God as a friend, or your father, or maybe your teacher.
But there's one particular way that the Bible talks about this relationship that you find all over. But strangely, we don't talk about it that much. And that's the idea of a partnership with God.
A partnership like working alongside someone to accomplish a goal together.
Right, and this is actually what you see at the beginning of the Bible. God creates this good world full of all of this potential. And then God appoints these unique creatures, humans, as His partners in bringing more and more goodness out of all that potential.
But the humans don't want to partner with God. They rebel and try to create a world on their own terms.
And so this broken partnership is the Bible's explanation for why we're stuck in a world of corruption and injustice and the tragedy of death.
It's not like there's just 1 or 2 humans who have bailed on this relationship. In the story of the Bible, everyone has abandoned the partnership with God.
So what God does is select a smaller group of people out of the many, and He makes a new partnership with them called a covenant. And in a covenant, God makes promises and then in exchange asks His partner to fulfill certain commitments. And the purpose of all of this is to somehow use this covenant relationship to renew His partnership with everybody else.
Now, there are actually 4 times in the Old Testament that we're told God initiates a covenant relationship with Noah, Abraham, the nation of Israel, and King David.
And it's through these that God is forming a covenant family into which all people will eventually be invited.
So let's see how these work. The first one is with Noah.
So in this story, God has just brought the flood to cleanse the world of humanity's corruption, and Noah and his family are the only ones left. And so God makes a covenant with Noah, saying, listen, I know that humans will continue to be evil, but despite that, I'm not going to destroy it like this again. Instead, the earth will be this reliable place for us to work together.
Great. So what does Noah have to do?
Nothing. And that's what's so interesting about this first covenant, is that God is promising to be faithful, even though He knows humans won't be.
The next time we see God make a covenant is with a man named Abraham. God chooses him, promises to bless him, give him a large family, lots of land where they can flourish.
And in return, God asks Abraham to trust him and train up his family to do what is right and just. And the whole reason for this covenant is God says that somehow he's going to bring his blessing to all families of the world through this one family.
So that's Abraham. The next time we see God make a covenant is when Abraham's family grows into the tribe of Israel.
And this covenant is with the whole tribe. God asks them to obey a set of laws, which are these guidelines for living well as a community of God's partners. And if they do this, then God promises to bless them and that they will become a people who then represent him to the rest of humanity.
That's the covenant with Israel. The last covenant is with King David.
Yeah, the tribe of Israel has become this large nation ruled by David. And God asked David and his descendants to partner with him by leading Israel in obeying the laws and doing what is right and just. And God promises that one day, one of David's sons will come and extend God's kingdom of peace and blessing over all the nations.
So those are the 4 covenants that God makes in order to restore his partnership with the whole world.
But here's what happens. Israel breaks the covenant. They worship other gods, they allow horrible injustice, and so they lose their land and are forced off into exile.
So it seems hopeless. But during this time, Israel's prophets talked about a day when God would restore these covenants in spite of Israel's failure, somehow.
Yeah, they called it the New Covenant. And this is actually what's so interesting about Jesus, is that he's introduced into this story as the one who fulfills all of these covenant relationships. We're told that he's from the family of Abraham, and so he will bring the blessings of that family to the whole world. We're told that he's the faithful Israelite who was able to truly obey the law. And we're told that he's the king from the line of David, and so he goes about extending God's kingdom of justice and peace to all.
And that's really remarkable for one guy.
Yeah, and what it highlights is perhaps the most surprising claim of all made about this man, that Jesus is no mere human, but rather God become human. And God did this in order to be that faithful covenant partner that we are all made to be, but have failed to be. And so through Jesus, God has opened up a way for anyone to be in a renewed partnership with him.
So Jesus calls people to follow him and become part of this new covenant family.
And despite their failures, Jesus is committed to making them into partners who are becoming more and more faithful.
The story of the Bible ends with a vision of a fully renewed world, full of goodness and peace.
And there's this renewed humanity there, partnering together with God to expand the goodness of his creation. And so the end of the Bible story is really a new beginning.
Hey, this is Tim.
And this is John.
We think one of the best ways to understand the Bible is to take its core themes and trace them all the way from the beginning through to the end.
We also take individual books of the Bible and explore their themes and structure.
We're a nonprofit, and we're always raising money for the next video, and you could be a part of helping us do that.
You might not know that Tim is a pastor here in Portland at Door of Hope Church, and he's got some really good sermons. You can find them at timmackey.com.
You can download high-resolution versions of all these videos. You can get study guides, all for free at jointhebibleproject.com.
Okay, guys, now that we've sang some songs, now that we've studied the Bible, in fact, we're going to memorize Deuteronomy 29, verse 1 this week. And now that we've seen this little video about what a covenant really is and how it was all fulfilled in Jesus, I want to ask you to do an exercise. This is a way of rolling up your sleeves and putting what we're learning into practice. I'll put the exercise for you right there on the screens, and when this broadcast ends in just a moment, I want you as a family, or maybe you as an individual, to do this and work through this as a way of helping you remember what you're hearing from the Bible in Deuteronomy 29. Here's the exercise I want you to do as we wrap up this broadcast. I want you to write down your covenant terms with God. Notice, I didn't say God's terms with you. That's what we have in the Bible. I want you to actually pull out a piece of paper and something to write with, and I want you to write down, God, when I surrender to you, here's the promise that I made to you. I want you to actually write it on a piece of paper. That's your terms with God. And then I want you to sign your name like it's a contract. Because when you surrendered to Jesus and when Jesus changed your life, you really did enter into a relationship or a contract, a covenant with Him. But maybe you've never really written down or thought about the terms of that covenant. So I'm going to ask you this powerful lesson. will you write your terms down? God, here's what I promised for you when I asked Jesus to save me. I know what you promised me. I have it in the Bible. I want you to know, God, what I'm promising you. Would you write that down? Would you sign your name? And would you remind yourself of the terms of your relationship to Jesus as we wrap up this episode? Thanks for joining us. See you right back here next week. God bless.